Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'd like to welcome everyone to Moxie's webinar with Forrester. I have a few items to cover, and then we will get started. During this webinar, all lines will be muted to provide better sound quality for participants. We are recording the entire event, and the recording and related materials will be available to all attendees tomorrow. We have reserved some time for Q&A at the end of this session. You can enter your questions in the WebEx chat panel at any time during the event, and I will queue them up for our presenters to answer. Now, let's get started. Today's speakers are Sucharita Kadali, Forrester VP and Principal Analyst, serving e-business and channel strategy professionals, and Nick Mayberry, Forrester Consultant. Our final speaker today is Brian Strauss, VP Worldwide Field Engineering at Moxie. Let's get started with digital maturity from Forrester. Sucharita, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Just for those of you who may not be familiar with Forrester, Forrester is a technology research company, and I've been working with e-business companies for the last decade, really helping them as they evolve through their digital strategies and think about their investments. And in the hundreds of conversations that we've had over the years with different kinds of companies in all kinds of sectors, really there are four key competencies that we see every digital business that is really at the top of its game and is considered best in class. All of the aspects that they do well fall into this circle framework on the right-hand side. So on the top part of the circle are really the places where companies often start, and that is a combination of the consumer-facing and ultimately the end user experience. And if you're B2B, your customer is going to be a little bit different than if you're a B2C company. But it's really what is visible to whoever ultimately is consuming your product, and how are those digital experiences best in class, and how well are the experiences communicated in all of the different devices that users are engaging with, whether it's a mobile device or a desktop or a laptop, or it could be a voice interface or a touch screen or any type of a format that may exist. How strong is that experience, and how well suited is it to the use cases that you've provided to the customers? The next area is what's often back-end facing, and that's the excellence that we see in digital operations. And that can be everything from how strong is your usage of data, and how do you leverage the data that you have to make better business decisions, to really how strong are just your overall availability, deliverability. Are you leveraging digital to the degree that you can to really optimize your supply chain or any part of the non-customer facing operation that's essential? We include things like, if you happen to capture transactions, are you doing as strong of a job as you could with fraud management and with engaging aspects that are behind the scenes and aren't necessarily visible, but still nonetheless incredibly important to the overall profitability and execution. The next areas are where we tend to see more advanced companies, and one of the aspects is digital innovation, and that is pivoting on new businesses and really growing into areas that may not have existed before, and leveraging digital competencies to achieve that. Some of the large technology companies are particularly masterful at executing exactly that. And then the last bit involves the digital ecosystems, and those companies are ones in which they leverage third parties and other partners to really not only augment the network effect and the overall broad usage of their own products, but in response, what they often get is a large network of data and insights that help fuel the flywheel flywheel to support their businesses even further. So really, great digital execution is a combination of many things, and certainly there are those that are more beginner stage, and there are those that are, of course, more advanced as well. And we'll talk through these in a little bit more detail. So when we look at the different evolutions of different companies, we bucket them really into what phase that they are, whether they're beginner, intermediate, or advanced. And typically, when a company is in a beginner phase of digital evolution, really there's the perception within that company that digital is simply a bolt-on strategy. And these are the organizations that tend to have the least mature organizational structure. The digital organization is often very siloed. In the early days of any type of a digital business, even in the early 2000s and late 90s, what we would often see is just simply a completely separate digital role within companies that had its own separate P&L, its own separate staffing, and sometimes there was dotted line relationships to the rest of the organization, but they were typically viewed with in their own ways, and those often were the first phases where companies would get digital products off the ground and make a proof of concept and get some type of evidence that there was a need to invest more. And then those companies often do evolve to the intermediate level, where they do more wholeheartedly embrace digital transformation. At that point, you start to see organizational structures changing, and functions like operations or marketing end up becoming more integrated. There are no longer siloed digital marketing teams. There are marketing teams that look overall across the entire function, and digital media ends up being a piece of that. Similar approaches with respect to even IT and operations, where it's no longer just its own silo that is related to the website or some kind of digital touch point. The functions are more integrated throughout an entire organization, and the digital touch points are part of any organizational structure's overall mandates and responsibilities. And then the most advanced element of the roadmap, and this is something that we, to this day, don't see in a number of non-technology companies. When you look at traditional businesses and sectors ranging from hospitality or financial services or retail or manufacturing, we generally don't see as much in the way of digital disruption. Sometimes with some media companies, we may, because they were forced into some digital disruption through just the mediums that their products actually delivered. But for the most part, where we see most companies hovering is in the intermediate section. To evolve to the advanced section is really that is a level of embracing change and moonshot products, innovation, and really envisioning a completely different mix in a revenue model than ever before. When you look at the large technology players, whether it's a Google or a Facebook or an Apple or even Amazon, and you look at their businesses over the last 20 years, the revenue mix of what they were in 1998 is almost entirely different than their revenue mix today. So that's important to keep in mind. So in terms of what are the so whats and what are the to-dos for different companies and different phases of evolution within their digital transformation journeys, we have some guidelines and some advice that we've gathered over the years in understanding in our research with companies who are in the midst of their own journeys and how they evolved from one phase to the next, or how they became best in class in their respective categories. So when we look at companies who started very, very immature digitally, These are companies that may never have had a digital presence, or they were extremely new to digital because they didn't necessarily need to invest in the channel. We often see to this day a number of B2B companies in manufacturing falling into this bucket because they've been perfectly fine, kind of manually taking orders or communicating in the ways that they'd communicated 30 and 40 years ago. But as we see even those companies evolve, there are a few things that we see the leaders in those companies doing as they evangelize digital. And the first is they really do a great job with internal workshops to educate different team members. And that often starts with teaching executives within a company the value of digital. We do hear that it's easier now because of the prevalence of mobile phones and the fact that so many executives have children that use these devices, that the inescapability of it becomes more prominent and prevalent than ever before. But the truth is that you're just really educating executives and exposing colleagues to new ideas. And that can take the form of benchmarking and showcasing data from other companies on the percent of transactions that may happen on, through some type of a digital medium, or the number of customers that are engaging with different types of digital channels during the course of a similar transaction. Or it can be just presenting other examples of companies in other parts of the world, or even in parallel or adjacent sectors where the transformation is happening and the digital touch points either are increasing customer engagement or they're reducing the cost of servicing a customer, and at the same time delivering greater satisfaction or higher net promoter scores that are important in those endeavors. The second thing that the best executives will do is that they paint a picture, they create a compelling vision, and then they relentlessly communicate that internally throughout the opportunities that they have. And those can be at on-sites, off-sites, company meetings, any opportunity where they have to talk about the importance of digital and the opportunities that it presents a business even better. There are a lot of traditional business frameworks like Porter's 5 Forces that some of these companies will also employ because they are so established and respected, and because they are extremely defensible ways to how digital can actually enhance and augment a business in its journey toward its future goals. And then the last thing that also happens, because it's not just all about bringing in outside examples and showcasing what others are doing, a lot of it is also showcasing what's happening internally right now. And there are any number of frameworks that are evaluative and provide scores for companies as they are looking at their digital execution and how well they're meeting their customers' goals. And often for beginners to be able to show that your business is not up to par, or that it is scoring substantially worse than other peers, is often a way to get the buy-in in order, and the budgeting to improve one's presence. And then, of course, there's road mapping to ensure that what you are doing actually is going to have the near-term ROI, and that you're tackling the low-hanging fruit first versus things that may be some of the shinier objects that often, even in the beginning phase, sometimes executives will get distracted by, and they'll want to, we'll hear all the time some beginning phase companies wanting to invest in things like voice technology when they don't even have functional websites. So you really want to make sure that you're going through the crawl, walk, run process. For intermediate firms, they continue to build on those early successes and presumably, kind of those companies that have done all of those aspects where they've got the buy-in, they have the C-level support, they're doing the benchmarking, and they have those initial steps in place to get to at least industry standard, then they become a little bit more mature. And certainly they're constantly reviewing past lessons, they're auditing themselves, they're looking at things like the sentiment analysis, in particular of their own customers. And they are investing a lot in what we call keep the lights on work. So these are the things to just make sure that you are not falling behind and that you are executing at the level that customers believe are table stakes for your business. But then these companies, their leaders will evolve that digital vision. And then they start to look more at, well, what's next? How can we get beyond just simply scoring in the middle of the distribution of, how companies execute? How do we get toward being more best in class? How do we get toward doing things that are special? And that's where we go beyond just things like Porter's Five Forces, and we may start to see more of an integration of frameworks like Jim Collins and looking at, really getting yourself to the next level and looking at big, hairy, audacious goals, the BHAGs, that really help you get to being outstanding in your sector. And a key part of that is the innovation. And this is the point at which companies start to really think about how they can innovate more. And they embrace design thinking in engaging in digital solutions. They're really, really spending a lot of time with ethnographic research and market research to understand how are your customers using your products and what are the opportunities to create new products that don't exist that can delight your customers even more. And then these companies do something that is really, really important and critical, and is seemingly so simple, but is yet something that I find is such an obstacle, which is to have a budget put aside for innovation. And not only is there that budget that is put aside, that those monies aren't always earmarked from the beginning. And that's something that's very, very different from historic approaches to budgeting, which is that, you need your money and, you have to decide 12 months ahead of time exactly how you're going to spend that money. And that leaves you no flexibility as the year goes on to pivoting or experimenting with new things if you just happen to discover that there's a new solution that could make sense, or there's a new innovation in the market, or there's a competitive threat that you need to respond to. And a lot of companies are often left with their pants down when things like that happen. And by having some flexibility to be able to lean into those types of market dynamics. I mean, we talk about how quickly things are changing these days, but our financial budgeting has absolutely not adjusted to that reality of change. So these are things that are incredibly important to keep in mind. If you've ever heard the team at the auto company Porsche, for instance, speak, they'll talk about exactly this, and it needn't be about, investing in every single innovation strategy. They have decided that they're going to place their bets in innovation on a handful of things like, looking at autonomous cars, or looking at some things like voice in the automotive experience. And from that, all of their innovation strategies and the partners that they use and the things that they're looking at really, really tie back to those approaches. And then finally, we get to the advanced firms. And these are companies that completely embrace disruption. And the biggest indicator, as I'd mentioned earlier, of embracing disruption is how the revenue mix of a company changes. If I were to look at Amazon circa the year 2000, the vast majority of its revenue was coming from first-party sales of its own media. So it would be books, to a lesser degree, video and music. At this point in time, not only is that a minority of its revenue, but it has a number of new businesses ranging from advertising to web services to third-party marketplace sales, which have completely shifted how that company generates not only top line, but the ecosystem of what it supports. So those companies that are really in the advanced world lead their customers. And the way that they lead their customers is in a few different ways. They work on moonshots. They're constantly embracing innovation, both within the organization, but also looking at new startups and investing in those new startups that may provide new revenue opportunities and new technology solutions that can improve one's own business operations. They leverage data, and these are companies that are extremely data heavy. They lead with data, perhaps more than anything. Every part of the organization is about taking advantage of insights from data that's gleaned from every possible source, whether it's online or offline, or whether it's any touch point of any user of the ecosystem, including employees and suppliers. And then lastly, they are, and this is a phrase that Amazon uses often, which is that because they talk about how obsessed they are with the customer, and the same with companies like Apple, but they're competitor aware. And what that means is that you don't do necessarily what your competitor does unless you really admire it, but you are just constantly being kept apprised of who's nipping at your heels so that you can continue to raise the bar as needed to differentiate yourself where possible. These companies also have ecosystems, so they often tend to have parts of their business that are open and that allow others to build capabilities on top of them. They work with a lot of third parties. That not only helps to build out their product offering, but it also basically locks a lot of partners or customers into an ecosystem, which then affects switching costs, of course. And then the last bit that is so important is that the most advanced companies, and this I think is a very, very big difference between beginner and intermediate companies, is that they are developing their own IP. And while a lot of traditional companies may develop IP more slowly in their core business, like with their products, these companies are developing IP faster, but they're also developing new products and solutions, certainly that affect technology and their technology. These are companies that are aggressively filing patents. The number of announcements and patents that Google, Facebook, and Amazon make on virtually a weekly basis is just astounding. And very, very few traditional companies have that cadence and that speed with which they too are releasing new things, in part because they will say that they don't have as much of a budget, but I would also argue that some of it is just cultural as well, because there are often a lot of great ideas within an organization that stand to be improved, because a lot of it's not just even, kind of things that are about patenting things. A lot of it is about taking advantage of your customer ideas and your employee ideas. If you've ever visited an Amazon fulfillment center, which I encourage you to do if you haven't already, because they have a number of tours of their fulfillment centers, in the front of every fulfillment center, they have a board that has employee ideas on things that are just inefficient that can be improved. improved. And then the managers then will evaluate those. And some of those are good enough that they actually get rolled out through the whole organization. But I would challenge every company to do that because in my experience, very, very few companies have that that completely open back and forth of dialogue between employees and managers on how to improve and how to kind of make yourself we talk about us as people, as humans, being our best selves, and we don't espouse that same principle in the companies and the businesses that we work with. And then the last bit is that the big technology companies who are the advanced digital disruptors just generally tend to be better hirers. They are constantly looking for new talent. Their positions are generally not backfills for people who have left. They have constant pipelines. If there's somebody interesting, they will talk to that person, and they will then keep those individuals in mind so that when positions do open up, they're able to interview people who kind of often are the best fits for those various roles. So those are important aspects to keep in mind too, is that these are more proactive approaches to hiring versus reactive approaches to hiring. And in tight labor markets, as we are in now, that proactive approach with a large databases of promising individuals is a much bigger asset to hold on to. So I'm going to now pass the virtual mic back over to the Moxie team. This is my information. If anyone does have any questions about these slides, or if you would like to follow me and my musings on Twitter, and I will be on as well for some Q&A at the end. So thank you.
Thank you, Sucharita. And actually, Nick from Forrester is up next. Nick, you should have control now.
I do. Thank you. And thank you, Sucharita.
Wonderful.
So my name is Nick Mayberry, and I'm a consultant in Forrester's Total Economic Impact practice. I led the study on Moxie Kbot, and I'm happy to be here today to talk to you about the findings. So here's a bit of a preview of what I'll be going over. What is a TEI? Why does it matter? The customer journey, the composite organization, and then the TEI study results. So what's a TEI? The purpose of the TEI is to help companies quantify the benefits of the technologies they offer. Forrester prepares the TEI as an objective third party, but does bring with us years of experience across diverse technologies. So we end up looking at four main areas when determining the ROI of a technology that we're analyzing. First, we look at the benefits. These are both quantified and unquantified benefits. So in terms of quantified, things like cost savings, other financial benefits. Unquantified benefits, usually customer satisfaction or employee satisfaction, things like that. We also look at the costs. These include licensing and implementation costs. We look at flexibility. So flexibility, what do we mean here? We're talking about future-proofing the business or maybe discovering new use cases for the technology. And then we also apply a risk factor that accounts for a number of different variables that differ between organizations, not just the organizations that we interview, but also the organizations reading the report. And so before I actually go any further, I do just want to call out a few things. This presentation is actually an abridged version of a comprehensive case study that should be referenced for any additional detail. We based this study on a number of interviews we did with Moxie customers. Moxie introduced us to those customers. However, they were not part of the interviews, and Forrester maintained complete editorial control over the content of the study. Although we saw very positive results in the study, Forrester does not endorse Moxie or make any guarantees about the results an organization may receive from adopting the platform. So the customer journey. Forrester interviewed 4 Moxie Kbot customers. As you can see, 2 are from the financial services and insurance industries. 2 were from e-commerce and retail. These were companies in the United States and the EU. And they also varied demographically. So they range from hundreds to tens of thousands of employees, and also from tens of millions in revenue to tens of billions in revenue. What we found was that key drivers that led customers to look for a solution included confusion for consumers along the digital path to purchase, inefficient customer contacts, lengthy and expensive internal development processes, These key drivers led firms to look for solutions that could proactively guide customers along their digital journey, that could reduce unnecessary contacts with the contact center, and that could be managed by non-technical staff with limited involvement from IT. And then what we found in terms of the key results include increased conversion rate on digital channels resulting in additional profit, an improvement in contact center efficiency, increased customer acquisition that ended up lifting profits through additional lifetime value, a reduction in the number of returns and cancellations, and lastly, an improvement in speed and cost to develop digital engagement. One customer shared that for one 4-month period, their conversion rate from Kbot was 12.58% versus the non-Kbot conversion rate of 2.5%. So that was a 5x increase just from Kbot. In terms of the composite organization, what Forrester does is take all the data that we receive from the customer interviews and build a composite organization that can represent the 4 interviewed companies, as well as just a general sort of fictitious organization that will help the readers of the study apply the model to their own businesses. So in terms of our composite organization, we modeled about $500 million to $1 billion in annual revenue, 5,000 full-time employees, 54 million annual visitors to the website and mobile app, a prior 2% conversion rate, a 10% annual increase in those number of visitors, and then $150 average order value. Now, you'll see potentially in your own business, much greater average order value if you happen to be in, say, financial services. You might have a multiple of this. This sits somewhere between, I'd say, retail and financial services. So, the study results. Forrester has determined the following 3-year impact based on the analysis of those customers that we interviewed. We analyzed an ROI of 701%, a net present value of the investment of $8.1 million, and a payback period of actually less than 3 months. One of the customers we interviewed, a head of marketing of financial services, shared that we've seen our online completion rates increase dramatically over the year period. The more engagement with Kbot during the online process, the better. Customers quantified key benefits from the Moxie Kbot investment. In terms of the composite organization, the total benefits received over 3 years, risk adjusted, were about $9.3 million. The first benefit was about $4 million of that, and decreasing through the first 5 benefits. But we did see a total of 5 benefits that I'll now go into detail on. The first benefit is profit growth from increased conversion rate. So this benefit saw about $4 million over 3 years. Before using Moxie Kbot, the interviewed organizations expressed difficulty increasing their conversion rates. After Moxie Kbot, the interviewed organizations actually realized substantial lifts in those conversion rates. And those lifts ranged anywhere from 3.5 to 10 percentage points, depending on the business and the customer that we were speaking to. Below that, what you'll see is how we actually ended up calculating this benefit. We saw the number of annual Kbot offers in the model increase over 3 years from 500,000 in the first year to 6.5 million in the third year. We applied a percent of Kbot offers engaged with of 70%. This basically takes into the account that a visitor might not see the Kbot offer appear, or they may have already seen it before and therefore not receive the full benefit necessarily from it. We had a conversion rate without Kbot or before Kbot of 2%. And then when Kbot was triggered, we applied essentially the average increase that we saw across all the customers in the benefits, which is 6 percentage points. So with Kbot, that would be 8%. And then applied that to the average order value of $150. We saw that growth from increased conversions, profit growth from increased conversions in the first year was $315,000, and that went up to $4.1 million. We then applied a risk adjustment of 15% to that, and we ended up with the $4 million benefit over 3 years. The second benefit were cost savings from reduction in return processes. So before using Moxie Kbot, interviewed organizations suspected that consumers were confused along the path to purchase. This confusion led to consumers not being entirely sure of all the different aspects of the product, maybe that they were ordering, or in terms of financial services or insurance, entering maybe the wrong personal information in a quote. And therefore, with Kbot, the proactive notifications helped customers be more certain that they were either receiving the right product or inputting the correct information, which led to an increase in order accuracy and therefore a decrease in returns or cancellations. So the way that we calculated this, same number of annual Kbot offers moving up over 3 years, same percent of Kbot offers engaged with. We heard a variety of different return or cancellation rates, and so we applied them in the the return rate increased over those 3 years from 0.5% to 3% as more Kbot offers were applied to the digital journey. The average order value remains the same at $150, and of course we applied an average cost of that return or cancellation of 15%, which led to cost savings from a reduction in returns or cancellations between $40,000 and $3.1 million over those 3 years. Again, here we applied the risk adjustment of 15%. The third benefit, so this was a great quote we actually heard from one customer just about the return or refund process. He shared that they're saving millions of pounds. This was a customer in the UK, millions of pounds avoiding credit refunds because ultimately, if you have the right product or the right user experience, they won't have to return your product or ask for a refund. The third benefit, profit growth related to lifetime value of new customers acquired. Here, what we're doing is we're taking the benefit that you receive from a newly acquired customer, their lifetime value, and forwarding it so that you can see the net present value of that. In terms of the first benefit, the conversion rate, that conversion rate benefit number one, is actually agnostic to new and returning customers. Additional conversions from Kbot help cross-selling existing customers as well as increase new customer acquisition. And therefore, Moxie Kbot customers saw an additional benefit of increased profit modeled here thanks to the lifetime value of those new customers. We have taken out the benefit of that original conversion. So this only applies to the lifetime value of newly acquired customers. Here we have an annual customer value of $75. We are fairly conservative here and assumed that the average customer made one purchase of the average order value every 2 years. So that's why it's $75, the average order value being $150. We have the average customer lifespan as 4 years. We have net new customers due to Kbot as 30% of the total conversions, a net profit margin of 10%, and therefore a profit growth related to new customer acquisitions and their lifetime value of $135,000 in the first year, ratcheting up to $1.7 million in the third year. Again, a risk adjustment of 15% has been applied. The fourth benefit customers saw were efficiency gains in the call center from decreased call volume. Before using Moxie Kbot, consumer-initiated contacts aimed either to address common issues or to request information that could be found elsewhere on their digital properties. After using Moxie Kbot, organizations could ensure that consumers' most common questions were answered along their path to purchase, preventing the initiation of a call or chat session. Here, we took annual contact volume as about 10% of annual visitors to the site. So that's why it goes from 540,000 to 650,000 in the third year. We have an average cost per contact of $6. We have the percentage of calls deflected by Kbot increasing from 3% in the first year to 15% in the third year as more Kbot offers are deployed across the digital journey. And this leads to efficiency gains in the contact center of just under $100,000 in the first year to just under $600,000 in the third year. Again, a risk adjustment of 15% has been applied. The fifth and final benefit that customers reported seeing were costs avoided from internal development time. So before using Moxie Kbot, customers used internal development teams that spent time updating code iteratively to produce better customer engagement. After using Kbot, non-technical teams were empowered to manage and deploy Kbot engagements and ended up basically taking this customer engagement development into their own hands on the Moxie Kbot platform. Here, we assume developers needed per individual customer engagement project as 2, their average hourly burdened rate at $78, and then the development weeks saved per year beginning in the first year at 12 weeks up to 52 weeks in the third year as more Kbot offers were deployed across the site. And then the costs avoided from internal development then ratcheted up from $75,000 in the first year to $324,000 in the third year. Again, the risk adjustment applied was 15%. Additionally, there are benefits to using Moxie Kbot that customers couldn't quantify. So these are the unquantified benefits here. They include ease of implementation, increased customer satisfaction, improved employee satisfaction, and diminished use of remarketing solutions. RTE analyses also incorporate this idea of flexibility. I mentioned it earlier. It's really about future-proofing your business or maybe finding new use cases for the technology. Here we found that Moxie Kbot actually allows for the near real-time deployment of new engagement without new code. This allowed non-tech teams to implement promotional initiatives utilizing Kbot and ensure timeliness and relevancy to the organizational strategy around these promotions. Of course, customers incurred costs associated with the use of Moxie Kbot. Here we found 3 categories of those costs. The vast majority of the costs are actually just the direct cost of Kbot offers and article views, amounting to 73% of the total costs. Minimal costs incurred with regard to setup and configuration, only 4% of the total. And then there are also ongoing management costs associated with Kbot, about a quarter of the total. And the 3-year total cost present value was about $1.2 million. That is a summary of the report. I believe that everyone who attends will be receiving the report, or at least a link to get it. But I'll leave that in Moxie's hands, and I'll actually turn it over to Brian from Moxie now.
Yeah, well, thank you, Nick and Sucharita, and that was excellent. So a lot of you are probably wondering, what does this look like in action? And I'm going to take the next couple minutes to show you. So I just wanted to kind of leave us with this quote start us with this quote from Dimension Data. And I think really the point here is that, how you engage your customers ultimately isn't just about competing against, some of the other customers or the other companies in your space and differentiating yourself. It's certainly about that. But that always remembering that, customers have a standard that's sort of set by their last really good interaction with a company. And so as we then look at how some of these principles that you saw, Sucharita talk about in a maturity model and then Nick bring home in sort of the total economic impact, what does that look like from a brass tacks way when we're implementing Moxie Kbot? So just taking a look at one of these banking customers that we've deployed against. So starting on the left-hand side here, these are a couple of mobile examples here. And a really common strategy in the beginning is really, contact deflection. And so what we see is that often early on in a customer engagement strategy, the first knee-jerk reaction is to kind of open up as many channels as possible to customers to contact us. Let's make their satisfaction, let's make it easy for them, let's provide every channel under the sun. And that does have an effect that, presses up some amount of retention and some CSAT. But what we also find is that ultimately it just ends up ramping up costs tremendously. And these organizations, despite those results, have a desire to deflect, sort of repetitive contacts. And so a great way to do that is like this example number 1 with Kbot here is essentially when somebody is reaching out to contact you, in context, as opposed to just offering them a smorgasbord of channels, let's actually provide them with the best channel proactively. So you're seeing an engagement coming down from Kbot on a mobile phone and saying, as opposed to just these channels, which are here if you want them, we think this is the best way for you to take care of this contact. We understand what's going on here. We're speaking contextually to the use case. And if you just tap this, we'll help you get the most efficient answer. So whether that's a tweet-sized bit of information, or that's a video, or even a form, or some form of buying guide, or sort of colloquial explanation of the service is what can be deployed there. Really, the sky's the limit. And then moving forward, you're seeing the next level of maturity is really not moving away from service, but also starting to incorporate elements that are not service-oriented necessarily. They're a little bit more focused on e-commerce kind of journey stuff. So in this case, their desire to cross and upsell customers. And this is where a lot of you, when Nick talks about the conversion benefits. So in a lot of cases, what we can do is that customers are used to getting guidance from lots of walks of life now, and we believe e-commerce should be the same idea. And so our customers are deploying proactive engagements ahead of known struggle and hesitation points. And also when we're looking contextually at products and features that current customers don't have already, we can reach out and make suggestions to get around some difficult features to help them log in or help them recover their password or their credentials, or to facilitate them completing a cross-sell or an upsell. So the basic idea there is, instead of waiting for them to contact and then providing them the best channel, let's get ahead of the contact. Let's prevent the ticket from being created in the first place by sensing when those customers are approaching a difficult point in the journey. And then lastly, at step 3, this is really the next level of maturity, where now that you've kind of deflected and got ahead of a lot of the routine contacts, a lot of organizations have a desire to increase meaningful conversations so they can use their live channels more efficiently. So in this case, using Moxie Concierge, in this use case, we said, you know what, we want to deflect a bunch of contacts and guide people with Kbot, but in this use case, we do want to proactively chat with customers. And so Moxie is actually, is making a lot of inroads here, and this is where we're using AI. So we're making sure that these meaningful kind of live conversations, the transcripts of which are being mined with AI and then are being used to suggest more proactive engagements for customers, and more of those Kbot engagements, those automated engagements that we're seeing in examples 1 and 2. Okay, so anyway, that's really the overview that I wanted to provide, and certainly here's the information if you want to get in touch with me or with Moxie in general. And with that, Gillian, I'm going to turn it back to you. Thank you.
Perfect. I know we're running over. We had hoped to keep this to 45 minutes, but just 2 minutes. So, but there was one question that came up a couple of different ways, so I did want to ask it. We welcome you guys to stay on. That's 2 questions, actually. One being the first bullet there. We were recording it, and the information will be available tomorrow. So that came up several times, so do keep an eye out for that. The other one was a couple different people wrote in about the difference between how is what you were describing in the screenshots you were showing, Brian, how is that different than an information pop-up that could be on a specific text field?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So sometimes those information pop-ups are also called tooltips. They're distinguished by like a little question mark or a what's this next to a field. And those are employed across e-commerce, and they are effective for some users. But what we find is that a lot of those kinds of options are rely on the customer to engage them reactively. And what we've found in our experience is that customers are not always cognizant of when they're struggling or hesitating. And so if you can take a more of a proactive stance with these key challenges when customers are acting, interacting with troublesome pieces of, form fields that require information they may not be familiar with, if you see specific string patterns or if you see them going down a particular road, being proactive, with a friendly contextual engagement that helps to provide an antidote to a potential struggle, we find is really, really effective. So for the folks that don't need it, it's not intrusive, but for the ones that would benefit, they get a chance to have the information when they may not have even asked for it, right? So they get a way of, when you're not even cognizant of being struggle, here's an antidote to something. It's like, wow, that's great. That was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So in an effort to give you some more time back in your day before I'm sure you're jumping to a next meeting, we will close up. I did want to offer, as Brian referenced, though, if you want to learn more, if you'd like to walk through these slides with Moxie in more detail or see how some of these TEI models can apply to your business, we'd love to have a one-on-one interaction with you. You can reply to any of the emails you received from us or through the channels that you see there on your screen. Thank you again for your participation, and have a nice day.